Hello, colleagues, and welcome to the Assistant Principal Podcast. I'm your host, Frederick Buskey. The goal of this podcast is to improve life and leadership for assistant principals and other school leaders. This episode recaps the daily emails from September 5th through 9th, 2022. If you already subscribe to my daily leadership email, I hope that having this podcast will help add a little bit of extra value. If you don't already subscribe, you can head over to my website at frederickbuskey.com where you can find links to subscribe to the daily email. A lot of readers like to start their morning by reading the daily message, and it just helps them be more intentional about their leadership and sometimes to reflect and set goals on how they can make a difference that day. All right, this past week was all about relationships, and I'll start with a story. My first administration job was at a county office in Ohio, and we call those educational service centers. What was unique about that situation was that the educational service centers, or ESCs, did a lot of district office functions, providing support for talented and gifted, curriculum, special ed, and those kinds of things. But we weren't part of the districts we served. So it was a very different model because we actually had to work for contracts and try to get the districts to buy in and be pleased with our services. So as I went around as a special ed coordinator, I was working with teachers who I was not supervising. And it was really critical to build relationships. And when I started the job, that's what my superintendent said. Your first job is to build relationships. And it's hard to admit, but I didn't really know what that meant. I was always a very task-focused teacher. I loved my kids. I would do anything for my kids, but that's who I focused on. I wasn't really that worried about the adults. I figured they could take care of themselves. So when it came to building relationships, I would go into a classroom, smile at the teacher, and I'd say, "Oh, how was your weekend?" But it really didn't usually go very well because when I asked them how their weekend was, I didn't really care, right? I was just trying to build relationships so I could do my job. So that was something that it took me a long time to learn about and to understand. So I think that's an important perspective as we recap these daily emails. If you're somebody that kind of struggles at that relationship piece with me, like me, then I hope this will really help you. If you're a pro at relationships, I still think you should really pay attention because understanding how to actually build those relationships will allow you to better lead and coach people like me and help us do better. On Monday, we looked at 3 different forms of workplace relationships. One is congenial. In a congenial relationship, we're all friendly. We go socialize, we do things together, but we can't have the hard conversations about teaching and learning, and we can't give each other critical feedback because congenial relationships really are based around the social components of relationship. On the flip side is pragmatic relationships, are pragmatic relationships. And that's where the relationship is solely focused around work. And I was really good at those because that was my focus. It was, let's get in, let's roll up our sleeves, and let's do the work. The third kind of relationship is collegial. In collegial relationships, we can do the work, but we also understand the social side of those relationships. I think one thing that's happened with this pandemic, it has really shown us the importance of understanding that social side of a relationship. Social's not enough, but it's so critically important because there's so much going on in people's lives that as leaders, we need to understand that and we need to be sensitive to that. So congenial is where we're friendly, pragmatic is where we're work focused, and then collegial relationships are where we can do both of those things. On Tuesday, I talked about the first step to building a relationship, and that is to care. Don't laugh at me, right? Remember the story from the beginning. If you're focused on pragmatics, it can be really hard to stop and slow yourself down and focus on really caring for people. But caring is critical. There are three ways that people like me can become better at caring. The first is to recognize your own imperfections. The second is to begin to appreciate all of the diverse perspectives that are out there. And then third, and I think this is really key, learn the stories behind those different perspectives. When you encounter people that don't think like you, don't act like you, they probably haven't lived the same experiences as you. And so to understand them and appreciate them, you really need to learn those stories. So when we're starting out building relationships, we need to understand our own imperfections, appreciate diverse perspectives, and work to learn the stories behind those perspectives. On Wednesday, we built on that early part of building the relationships and talked about being present, asking questions, and listening. Presence is hard. Presence is really hard for two reasons. Number one, we're super busy. So actually just carving out the time to spend time with somebody is critical. But the second piece of it is that our brains are so overactive that even when we're with someone, we're thinking about 1, 2, 3, 4 other things that we're getting ready to do. And so even when we're physically present, we're not fully present. But presence is the key. When you're fully present, then you can listen. Then you can ask the right questions. Now, what we've described so far is kind of a one-way relationship. It's where we're doing the listening, we're doing the asking, and we're really working hard to understand them and show that we care. The strongest relationships are going to be two-way. So how do we build the kind of relationship where they care about us and they're interested in our lives? And I think one of the really important things to do is to be vulnerable. By definition, being vulnerable isn't safe, but there are a couple of ways that you can be vulnerable in ways that are less vulnerable. So the first thing is to show that you're human. It's okay to have down days. Now that doesn't mean we complain, because as a leader, you are the lighthouse. But you can let people know sometimes when shining that light is taking more effort and is harder than other times. You can also ask for help. Asking for help that the listener can give, is so powerful because it lets them give to you, which helps them feel better about themselves. It also helps to build their own capacity, especially leadership capacity, when they're helping you. And then finally, you can share your dreams. Why did you become a leader? What do you hope to achieve? What do you want to see for your students and the teachers that you work with? Sharing dreams can be a really powerful way to build that relationship and build that reciprocal relationship with people. As you know, on Fridays, I like to ask reflective questions. So I have 3 questions for you right now. Number 1, what did you do this past week to build relationships with your early career teachers? Number 2, what can you take away from this podcast that will allow you to build relationships in the future? And number 3, what are you going to do next week to build relationships? So I think there are 3 big takeaways for the week. The first is that we do have to be intentional about building relationships. The second thing is that it's critical that we learn the stories behind people's lives. And then the third piece is that we need to be human with them and to be vulnerable. There are 2 big traps in building those relationships. The first is mistaking a collegial relationship for a congenial relationship and just trying to build friendships and be friendly and be nice. That's not the kind of relationship we're talking about. And then the other challenge is the flip side of that, which is just being so task-oriented and so task-focused that we don't take the time to really get to know the people that we're working with. As leaders, we have an ethical obligation to serve the people we work with, to help teachers grow and to help them find joy in their work. And when we know that story, when we take time to build those relationships, all of that work becomes easier. Easier for us and easier for them. I want to conclude with this. If you've been listening to recent podcasts or if you read the daily emails from last week, you know I've been talking a lot about urgency. And urgency is a huge problem because it stops us from being present, it stops us from building relationships, and it stops us from investing time into helping teachers grow. I talked about a concept called the black hole of urgency, where you have a dream, you have a goal, you're trying to go somewhere, but you can't get there because the gravitational pull from this black hole is so strong, it just keeps sucking you into this zone of urgency where you're running around, putting out fires, doing all that managerial stuff, but you can't make progress on the things that really are going to drive your school. You can't spend time with teachers, observing, looking at the data, working with them to identify places where they can grow. That urgency just keeps sucking you away. I want to do something about that. So I get a wild idea to do a webinar on addressing the black hole of urgency. And that webinar is going to be on September 22nd, 2022, if you're listening live in live time. September 22nd from 7 to 8:30 Eastern Daylight Time. This is a free webinar. I just really want to get on and speak to the issue of urgency. I think there are 4 things that I can achieve in this 90-minute webinar. The first thing is to help you understand the nature of the problem of urgency, because most of us think it's about time management, but urgency is not about time management. The problem is something different than time. The second thing I want to do is to help you approach urgent issues from a very different perspective that's going to be more constructive. The third thing is to learn and be able to implement some strategies for being strategically reactive. And that means while you're in that urgent place and you haven't escaped that yet, we're going to give you some strategies that you can use to kind of lessen the pull of that gravity. And then finally, I'll give you a couple strategies for being proactive and trying to accelerate your journey away from that black hole and get to that planet, get to that dream space of your leadership that you've been wanting to go to. It's a free webinar, September 22nd, 7 to 8:30 Eastern Daylight Time. The only catch is you do need to be a Quadrant 2 subscriber in order to get the link to join the webinar. Remember, Quadrant 2 is a bi-monthly microjournal. We're sending out about 2 or 3 issues a month. It's about 5 pages, focuses on a very specific topic, usually taking a theme that we've discussed in one of the podcasts previously and just digging a little bit deeper into it. You can subscribe to Quadrant 2 on my website at frederickbuskey.com/Quadrant2. And once you subscribe, then we'll send you a link to register for the webinar. And in fact, registration opens today, September 9th, 2022. So I hope you'll consider joining me. I think it's going to be a really fun time, and I can promise you'll walk away with a different mindset that is going to help you attack and deal with all the urgent issues in a way that's more productive and will lead to a better life and better leadership for you. Okay, that's it. That wraps up today's podcast, 5 for Friday version of the Assistant Principal Podcast. I hope you'll join me next time. Cheers.